Hey, good morning. People do often applaud when I walk in, so thank you. I appreciate it. We didn't want you to feel, for those of you that are here in person, we didn't want you to feel odd, so we put a screen on the stage. So I got something to watch. You can do church through your screen. I do want to say, just as we get started, we are, of course, super excited to be able to worship live together again. I mean, that is fantastic. And I know at the same time, the folks that are online, listen, there's no judgment coming your way. We are glad you're connecting with us. So whether you're here in person, we're excited about that. If you're online, we're excited about that. There's no judgment either way. Nobody's right or wrong. We're excited that we can join together as a church family and worship together on Sunday morning. So we're glad you're here, and we're glad you've logged on and you're watching us. So what's going on? Well, I don't think it takes a rocket science to figure out. We're living in different days, right? These are not normal times.
That's right.
You look
Hi,
back,
Mom.
Exactly. You look back and say, hey, okay, everything was normal until March 8th, and from that point on, as soon as the NBA canceled their first game and then canceled the season, it's like everything has been weird and unusual since then. And I don't know if you know this or not. Nobody probably tracks Sundays as much as we do. It has been 10 Sundays since we were last in this room. Can you believe that? 10 Sundays. It's been almost 3 months since we've been in this same room together. And so not only are we excited to get back, we also realized something pretty important, pretty major happened, right? In those 10 weeks, felt like 10 months, something happened that was kind of different. And that's why we've called this series Different Days. And so here's what I know about you. Your family, your job, your finances, the way your kids did school, all of those things, you've experienced some differences. You had a certain set of expectations, and those have changed. You had a certain set of experiences in the past, and those have all been different. And so it makes sense. It makes sense to ask the question, if things have changed in my relationships, if things have changed at work, if things have changed financially, what about my spiritual experience? What about my spiritual expectations? What is God doing in the middle of all of this stuff as we kind of come out of lockdown and we're not going back to normal? And I'm sorry, I wish we were, but we're not. Whatever we end up with next is not going to be like what it was before. Things are going to be different, and that's okay because things have changed all throughout history. That's not new. It just takes us a while to get used to it sometimes. And I know we wish we could just go back to the way things were, but we're not. And so it begs the question, if the whole world was put on pause for 2 or 3 months, does God have something to say about that? What would God want us to know or take away from this? Because surely he's saying something. And so we talked about this and we decided, hey, as a series, the next couple, 2 or 3 weeks, we want to talk about this idea that we are living in different days and go back to the very basics and just ask a few questions. And the first question is so straightforward and so simple, but who are we? Who are we? Especially if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus. Who are we after all this has happened, after all that's gone on, after whatever else is coming? Who are we? And that leads right into the next one is who's in control? And we'll look at that in episode 2. And you might say, well, I've gone to church long enough to know that I know God's in control. But let me add a little subtitle to that. Who's in control when it feels like no one's in control? And how is God in control when it feels like things are out of control? So we're going to talk about that in episode 2. And then finally, episode 3, we're going to talk about what is our purpose? What is our focus? What are we supposed to be doing? Once we figure out who we are and that God's in control, what are we supposed to be doing? Because like I said, we've got this unique opportunity where everything has changed, where our lives have kind of been put on pause and disrupted. And surely God wants to speak into that. Now, I don't know about you, but my guess is, and if you're watching online, I want you to type in the comments. If you're here live, I want you to raise your hands. But has anyone felt in the last 10 weeks a sense of fear or frustration just at any time, right? Yeah, so type me too, raise your hand. That's all of us. All of us have felt that. And here's what I want to tell you. I'm not going to tell you right this moment, but as we work our way through the message this morning, there's actually a really great God-designed way to deal with that. And the good news is you're already participating in it, even if you don't know you are, all right? So the fear and frustration that you feel, there is a solution to that, but it may be different than what you think it is. And God is speaking into that. And so as we think about who we are, I want you to keep that in mind because here's what I've learned. Here's what I've learned over my life, and I'm sure it's the same for you. It's reflection. It's that moment of stopping and saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? I need a different job. I need to change what's happening in our family. I need to do something different financially. I need to do something in my relationships. It's when we have that moment of reflection or sometimes months of reflection, that's what actually alters our direction. It's reflection that alters our direction. The reason you start a new career path, the reason you reinvest in your marriage, the reason you move to another city is you've reflected on something, you've realized something needs to change, and so you change direction. And God is asking us in the middle of all of this to take a moment and pause and reflect and rethink. Do I need to change direction? Now, like I said, today we're going to talk about who are we? And in the past, you probably would have, and maybe you still do, you would have answered that question by talking about what you do, right? Your job, for example. Like, well, I'm this, or I'm retired, or whatever it might be. I work in this industry. You may have been tempted to answer that question based on your family, right? Well, I'm a husband, or I'm a mom, or I'm a sister, or a brother, or whatever. And you answer that by family position. Sometimes we answer it by hobbies. Well, I'm really into this, or I'm really into that, or politics, or whatever it might be. We answer that question in a lot of different ways. But the truth is, God may want you to answer that question in an unexpected way. And so that's what we're going to reflect on this morning as we think about who are we.
Yeah, who are we is a great question. And I think we've all asked that question at some point in our life. I mean, if you look over the course of your life, you can look back and see those moments where you pause for just a moment to ask, well, who am I? Who am I becoming? What am I becoming? And again, it's a great question, and we look through these different filters that help us answer that question. Sometimes we go to mom and dad. Mom and dad, who do you say I am? I mean, what do you say about me when I'm with you and when I'm not with you? Who am I? And then even a little bit farther, what we'll do is we'll allow teachers to begin to define us. Well, who do my teachers say that I am? Or better yet, who do my friends say that I am? What do my friends say about me? How do they define me? How do they determine the character of who Cory is and what Cory's about? Or maybe it's colleagues. Maybe it's your boss. Maybe it's somebody else that you work with. But we're all looking for answers of trying to determine, well, who am I? Who are we? And what I want to do for a moment is I want us to shift from the individual to the corporate. Instead of asking, who are you? Because, see, God, I think, clearly defines who we are. We are his sons and we are his daughters. That's who we are. There's no mistaking. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what you've done. You are God's son and you are God's daughter. But who are we when it comes to the church? Again, we learned because of the last 10 weeks, we are not a building. We're not a building. I mean, right now, yes, some of us may be sitting in this room, but for weeks, and even right now, some are sitting on their patios at home, some are sitting in their living rooms, maybe at the kitchen table, maybe they're still in bed in their pajamas watching it on their phone. But we're still the church, no matter where we gather. God has reminded us that the church is not a building, but it's the people. That's the church. Who we are. Who are we is a great question. And again, we're not defined by a location because God can use his church, and we've seen God use our church over the last few weeks in helping people that need help, going out of our way to do things that others wouldn't do. And God uses his church when we're willing to be disrupted, when we're willing to allow ourselves to get out of the rut of life. And I mean, come on, we all like the routine. At least my family does. We function well with routine. I mean, we like our schedules, and we were getting ready just to fall into our spring schedule, as we call it. We knew what it was going to look like. It was going to be very simple. Both of my kids play baseball. I work for a church. My wife's a school teacher. We knew that it was all about divide and conquer. Because when baseball season hits, my kids are split, and they're going two different directions because I have a high schooler and an elementary age kid. And my elementary age kid and my high schooler, could their games be at different days, different times? No, it doesn't work that way. And your schedules probably don't work that way either. But God uses those disruptions in our life to begin to remind us who we are. And maybe you've taken this time to really reflect over what is important to you. What are your priorities in life? What are the things that you focus on? And then this morning, we're going to be looking at a passage that's actually found in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. If you have your Bibles, I want to encourage you to open them up. If you're following along on the app, or if you have the app, open it up. You're going to find the sermon notes right in there. But I want to encourage you to follow along as we begin to define what it means to be the church, who we are. And we find here is a writing from a guy named Peter who wrote a letter. And I love Peter because he's probably the one guy in the Bible that I can relate to the most. Because Peter is a lot, I think, like me, or I'm a lot like Peter in the sense that even in the middle of my failures, even when I make mistakes, when things don't go the way that I had planned or the way that I had schemed and organized for them to go, God still wants to use me and God still loves me. I mean, Peter shows us what it means to be human, what it means to be real. Because here's a guy, just a fisherman doing his own thing, living his own life, has an encounter with Jesus. Jesus says, hey, come follow me. He follows him. And for 3 years, he watches Jesus work. And he gets to participate in the work that Jesus has. He sees him heal people. He sees him raise people from the dead. He sees him takes a couple of fish and a couple of loaves of bread and feeds thousands of people. I mean, if I had experienced that, I probably would have done the same thing Peter did. Even though I had seen all of this, I still would have had that moment of denial or doubt or fear. And that's exactly what Peter did, because Jesus told Peter, hey, Peter, you're going to deny me. Peter's like, bro, no way. I got your back. We're in this together. We've got this. We can take on the world. We're going to change the world because of who you are and what you can do. I've got you. There's no way. I will die for you, Jesus. There's no way that I'll deny you. And what's so amazing is that even in that moment of denying Jesus, Jesus later reminds Peter, don't worry. Even in the middle of your failures, I'm going to use you. Even when you're at your weakest, I'm going to use you. And he makes this statement to Peter, Peter, don't worry about it, because upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. I'm going to use the church. I'm going to use you to do something that you thought you could never do. And then Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 2, in verse 9, who we are. And so again, if you're there, I want to read this to you. He writes this, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. When I first read that, I was kind of, I had to step back a little bit and begin to really look deep within it. Okay, what is it that Peter is saying? What is it that he's saying about you? What is it that he's saying about me? What is it that he's saying about us as the church? And the very first thing that he says, you are a chosen people. He says you're a chosen people. This is God's loving initiative to bring people back to himself. Our mission is simple here at Mountain Ridge, to bring people back to God. Because that's exactly what God is doing. God can take a different time, a different moment, a different place like we're experiencing now, and he can use that to begin to draw people to himself. And the beauty of that is that he wants to use you and me as the church the same way that he used Peter to help draw people to himself. We're a chosen people. See, everyone wants to know that they matter. Everyone wants to know that they belong. And this is Peter saying, you belong. You matter. You're chosen. But he doesn't stop there, because the next thing that he says is you are a royal priesthood. When I first read that, I was kind of like, okay, what does that mean? For our context in our church, we're pastors, not priests. Meaning this, the difference in that day and in that culture, they would go to the priest, and that priest would be a mediator on their behalf before God. Well, when Jesus came, that all changed, because we get to go directly to God. We don't have to have an in-between. And this is Peter saying, look, you're part of the royal priesthood. Yes, Jesus is the ultimate priest. It is Jesus that you look to. It is Jesus that you call upon, because it's all about him. But you don't need anyone else to go to get to him. You can go directly to him. And then he continues on and he says, you're a holy nation. A holy nation, God's special possession. Simply meaning that for you and for me, that God has gifted each and every one of us. He's given us talents. And he wants to use those gifts and those talents to begin to help build his church. And so often what we do is sometimes we'll take those gifts and those talents and we'll use them on Sunday, but it doesn't go beyond. But he wants to begin to use us. Again, we're not a building, we're a people. And when life is disrupted and the days are different, it causes us to reflect and to think differently than we did the day before, knowing that it's not going to be the way that it was yesterday. Meaning that if we don't meet in this building, if we were to move solely online, and I know for some of us, whoa, hold on, that's changing my world. It is. But there are thousands of people that are watching online, not just Mountain Ridge, but other churches all throughout our city that are hearing the gospel, that are hearing that they are God's sons and they are God's daughters and that they are loved. And that God wants to use us to be a part of what he's doing. Because look at how he finishes that passage. And the way that he finishes this, I believe, is our purpose statement. Because he finishes it this way: that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. That you may declare his praises. Declare his praises. Because he called us out of the dark and into the light. That you and I were created to worship. I mean, all of us worship something. I got to be honest. For me, when all this went down and baseball got taken away, it shattered my world. Because then I began to ask, what am I going to watch on TV? Last year's games. I mean, I was kind of like, hold on. Wait a minute. I mean, there's 162 games throughout this season. I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of every moment. I mean, I got to watch my favorite players, my favorite teams. I got to see their stats. I got to see the projections of where they're going, because we hope to get to the playoffs. We hope to get to the World Series, and we hope to win it all. But then that was all taken away. And it made me begin to evaluate, well, what do I worship? What do I worship? And again, I know you're probably a lot like me, and it may not be baseball. It could be something totally different. It could be your kids. It could be your job. It could be your spouse. It could be something else that you enjoy. Football. I know, I'm sorry. Basketball, hockey. You name it. Tennis. But he's saying, look, those are great things, and you should enjoy those. But it shouldn't be all about that. What you should worship is me, because I took you out of the darkness and I brought you into the light. See, our search for this answer, the ultimate meaning lies in declaring who Jesus is, for alone he is worthy of all of our praises. It's you and I declaring who Jesus is. So think about it for a moment. We declare here today who Jesus is, whether we're watching online or sitting in this room. We're declaring when we worship. Whether we raise our hands or close our eyes or sit in our seat and reflect on the words that we sing, we're worshiping, we're praising Jesus for who he is and what he did for us. That out of his love, that he went to the cross and he died for you and for me, even though we didn't deserve it. And that he conquered that death and our sin by raising from the grave. And that's why we worship. And we declare. You know that word declare? It means to proclaim. It means to advertise. And we're great doing that when we gather to worship, whether it's in this building or online. We're great at that. But what about Monday through Saturday? What about when I had to learn patience? When I had to teach my kids at home. Sorry, kids, nothing against you. But I'm not the best teacher, and I'm not the most patient when it comes to teaching my kids. What about when it came to discipline? When it came to discipline, when the gyms closed and I couldn't go and keep my regimen of going 3 to 5 times a week, what was I going to do? Was I going to be as disciplined when that all changed? What about with my finances? What about with my relationships? That all changed. But hopefully, in that change, in these different days, it leaned us into the church worshiping Jesus and declaring who he is. Because he wants us to declare it not just on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday as well. So if we know who we are, that we are loved and we are chosen, that we are his sons and his daughters, then what do we do? what does the church do? And I think that's a great question.
Yeah, when we talk about who we are, I think that everybody here would go ahead and admit and feel very comfortable saying that, you know what, the church is not a building, it's not an institution, it's people, it's us, right? And to put a little finer point on that, the church is me and you. That's the church. Me and you. Me and you. That's the church. Me and you watching online. It's not the organization. It's not some system or structure or anything like that. It's us. It's people together. And what we do is switch mics when one's not working. What we do as the church is really very, very simple. We worship Jesus and we love people. That's it. That's the reason we exist. That's all we have to do. And the whole, you probably never thought of it this way, the whole rest of the New Testament is just explaining how to do that. How do we worship God? How do we worship Jesus, and how do we love people? And Jesus himself said, we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We worship him, and we love people. It's very straightforward. And as the church, you and I, one of the things we do then is we gather together to worship. And I told you earlier that the fear and the frustration thing that all of us have felt, how do you deal with that? Because I got to be honest with you, it's not the way most people think. This is against conventional wisdom. Most of us think that if I'm afraid, I got to look inside and kind of, build up some courage and just push through, or get somebody to tell me that I'm special and I can do it, or whatever it might be. And when we're frustrated, most of us think, I got to get rid of whatever it is that's causing my frustration. I got to cut them out of my life, or move around them, or get a different job, or whatever it might be, so that I can get rid of my frustration. And the reality is neither of those things work, because you still end up afraid and frustrated. But there's actually an answer in Hebrews chapter 10. If you've got a Bible, it's still open, or if you're following along in the app. In Hebrews chapter 10, he tells us something really, really important, because he has spent the whole last 9 chapters telling us that Jesus is better than, okay? And your list may be different, but for him, his list was Jesus is better than Moses, Jesus is better than the law, Jesus is better than religion, Jesus is better than your tradition and your history and whatever else it is. In other words, whatever you want to fill in the blank, Jesus is better than that. Therefore, he's the only one worthy of worshiping. So as a church made up of people who follow Jesus, he says, here's what you should do. You should worship Jesus. Now listen to how he talks about it, though, because, again, it's very different. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. We'll put it up here, and I want to show a couple things to you. He says this. He says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Like, wait a minute. We were talking about worshiping Jesus. In the context of worshiping Jesus, this is what happens. We inspire each other. When you come to worship Jesus, the people around you that are gathered with you, they're inspired. They're motivated. They're encouraged towards love and good deeds. He says, verse 25, not giving up meeting together as some have the habit of doing, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day approaching. So here's my brilliant takeaway from all this. You know what happens when you gather together and worship Jesus? You worship him because he's worthy. But do you know what else happens? You encourage and inspire the people that you're gathered with. And you get inspired and you get encouragement from the people that you're gathered with. This is why he's saying, don't stop. He's not interested in full church buildings or bigger movements. What he's saying is fear and frustration can take over and begin to ruin your life if you neglect this idea of worshiping Jesus together as Jesus followers. Because the best antidote to fear is worshiping with someone else. The best antidote to your frustration is worshiping Jesus with other people. Those things change who you are. You go and you worship Jesus and it changes who you are. This is why it's so incredibly important. And he says, don't neglect that. Don't give up on that. And you're here and you're online, and I'm so excited that you are. I'm so thankful that you are. But I got to share something with you that's really disturbing to me. I came across this. This was before the pandemic hit. It is a statistic. And what they did is they went out and they surveyed people that go to church and say, now this isn't just everybody. This is people that say, I belong to a church. I'm active in my church. I go to church. Okay, great. And so they started surveying these folks. And they asked them, how often do you go to worship? And I know this is an average, so it's probably not you, okay? Because an average is a collection of everybody but doesn't really represent anybody, right? But the average person, when they looked at the calendar, actually put it on paper, attends worship as a follower of Jesus to worship with other Jesus followers 1.7 times a month. Most months have 4, some have 5 Sundays. And kind of, you think about an average worship service is an hour, okay? So kind of do a little math here and say over the course of 2 months, right? So 2 months,
the average person is dedicating a total of 3 hours to worshiping Jesus with their church family. And when I heard that and I began to think about that as a pastor, it really just crushes me. And again, it's not, hey, don't get me wrong. I love having a full house, okay? It's great to have every seat filled and people excited and the energy and all that happens. And you've told me that even. You've said, hey, online is great, but it's not the same. It's not the same as being in the building together. But if I'm a follower of Jesus, and there's really only 2 things I do, I worship Jesus and I love people, that doesn't seem to work. And the tragedy behind all of it is not only do you not have the opportunity to gather and worship, but fear and frustration then have an opportunity to take a big hold in your life, because that act of worshiping Jesus and gathering together beats back fear and frustration, but not if you can't do it. And that's why online worship was so important for us to kind of maintain while all this was happening. But here's the question I have for you. As we start going back to normal, because it is going to be a different normal, but sooner or later, we're all going to have kind of more normal routines in terms of going to work and going here and there and doing this and that, and kids are eventually going to go back to school and all those things. I just want to encourage you to pause and ask a question and rethink some things potentially. Do I need to rethink my life and schedule? That's it. That's all I'm asking you to do. If I'm a follower of Jesus and gathering to worship Jesus is one of the biggest priorities of my life, does my schedule work with that? Can I do that? Do I need to rethink my life and my schedule? Because God is speaking to us in the middle of all this. The only question is, are we willing to hear it? Like I said, it's that moment of reflection that changes the direction of our life. And if our life is not going the direction we want it to, this is the perfect opportunity to reflect and change direction. So we gather together to worship. The other thing we do is we love people. Again, Jesus is very clear, love your neighbors yourself. Love people. And so the people that follow Jesus, we love them. The people that don't follow Jesus, we love them too. Now, it works a little different because the relationship is a little different, but we still love them. And here's what you need to know about people that don't follow Jesus. The best way to love them, one of the most loving things you can do for them, is to introduce them to Jesus and invite them to follow Jesus with you. That is one of the most loving things you can do for somebody that does not know Jesus yet. It doesn't mean you ignore their needs in their life, but that is one of the most loving things you could possibly do. And we're going to talk about that in episode 3 when we get to what's my purpose, all right? But what about each other? What about you and I? How do we love each other? It's very simple. Actually, the New Testament's a great guide. We one another each other. All right, we one another each other. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, but what it means is all throughout the New Testament, there's about 47 different places where it talks about what we should do for one another, right? Okay, and so as a matter of fact, if you got the app, there's a link in there, and it gives you a link to this infographic that explains this really, really well, and it shows it all in one page, and it's really cool. I was so encouraged by it. I thought, you guys got to see this. Because it takes all of these one another's and puts them in one place. This idea that we're supposed to serve one another, that we encourage one another, that we refuse to gossip about one another, that we believe the best about one another, that we humble ourselves before one another. There's a long list of 47 different things that we do and ways that we love. Because like I said earlier, the whole New Testament is about how do we do this? We know that we love God and worship Jesus and we love each other. So how do we do it? That's what the rest of the New Testament tells us about. And I got to tell you, I am so proud of you as a church family. You have done this so very well. I mean, through the 10 weeks that we were shut down, every week somebody was calling me or calling the office or wanting to find out, hey, how do I get in touch with so-and-so? Hey, do you have a number? Do you have an email address? Do you have a way to get in touch with them? I'm concerned about them. I haven't heard from them. I want to check in on them. I want to see if they're doing okay. I saw their prayer request and I wanted to call and touch base. I mean, you guys were so intricately interwoven into each other's lives, and it was so exciting to see. You do a phenomenal job of loving one another. I mean, just Saturday, a big chunk of our church family was out yesterday morning helping clean up a yard for somebody that had to have everything done by Monday and couldn't do it by themselves. You guys are great at loving one another. And so as we pause, as we enter this moment, and as Cory talked about with that full schedule, that it's coming. If you don't have it already, it's coming. How can we be for one another even when life gets busy? How can we be for one another to make sure that as a follower of Jesus, I am worshiping him and I am loving others? How can we be for one another? Does it mean calling somebody in your community group and just checking on them? I thought about you. I want to see how you're doing. Does it mean noticing that somebody that used to sit by you in church isn't there, and I'm going to make an effort? I'm going to find out who they are and what's going on and make sure they're okay. Does it mean praying for people, even though you don't have an opportunity to talk to them today, but you can text them, you can connect with them, you can find out how they're doing. How can I pray for you? What's going on in your life? How can we be for one another? Because you see, who is the church? Well, we are the church, you and me. And what do? It's really simple. We worship Jesus. We love people.
That's right. I mean, I love that. It is that simple. I know that it is that simple. And when we gather together in this room, it's easy for us to say, well, yeah, that's what I do. Man, I get to see the people that I haven't seen all week. I get to love on them. I get to tell them about what's gone on in my week, and I get to worship Jesus. But I want to put it into perspective for you. There's 168 hours a week. So the question becomes, what do we do the other 167? If I've given an hour on Sunday, what am I doing the other 167? I mean, again, it's a different day. Things aren't the way that I had planned or expected. What am I going to do? If it has caused me to pause and to reflect, what am I going to do? Am I going to just try to fall back into the normal routine of where I was before? Because, again, we've said it, and you've probably heard it, and you've even probably said it yourself. It's never going to be the same. Tomorrow's not going to be the same as it was yesterday. It's just not. So where does that leave me? If I know who I am, if I know who we are as the church, that we are his sons and his daughters, that he chose us, and he has a plan and a purpose for us to make an impact. And the way we do that is by loving or worshiping Jesus and loving others, because that's what we're going to do as the church. Well, then how do we do that? The other 167, how do I do it? Because I learned that I don't have patience when it comes to teaching my kids, but how do I love them, even in the middle of my impatience? How do I love the people that I work with and minister and worship Jesus at the place that I work when I've been, put back to working at home and separated from the people that I was shoulder to shoulder with just a few months ago? So how do I worship Jesus and love them in this new environment, in this new way? I mean, because that's exactly what we should be doing. And so for each of us, it leaves us to begin to ask, well, what is my next step? What is it that God wants me to do in the middle of this? And so I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, because I think out of one of these 3 questions, you're going to find your next step. And here's the first one. I had to write them down because I didn't want to get it wrong. Have I let Jesus take his place in my life? Simply meaning, has this moment, at this time in history, has it caused me to pause enough to ask Jesus, do you have full control? Have I surrendered my life to you? Have I trusted you with everything? Or have I still been in control? And so maybe for you today, your next step is to say, you know what? I want to know more about what it means to follow Jesus, what it means to understand that Jesus died for me, and that he conquered death and sin for me, and he rose from that grave so that I could have life, meaning, and purpose. So maybe that's your question, and that helps you lean into your next step. Maybe for you, it's this question. What have I learned about myself and God during this quarantine time? I mean, really, what have I learned? Have I learned that I am impatient? Yes, guilty as charged. Have I learned that I'm not disciplined? I mean, have I learned that I'm not good at this full-time relationship, working at home with my kids and my wife and being in the same household that many hours together? It's not vacation. I mean, vacation, at least we can, we're doing, but now it's just so, maybe loving isn't my thing. And maybe God's revealed that to me. Maybe in this time you've realized when it comes to discipline, I'm not spending the time that I need to with God, looking to him for wisdom and direction and understanding of how to begin to deal with what's going on around me. I've sought so many other voices. I turn on the TV and everyone's telling me what I should think and what I should believe and what I should do, but I've actually gone to God and his word and looked to Jesus for his truth. So what have I learned about myself and about God during this quarantine time. And the last one is this: what can I do different moving forward to be used by God, not just on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday? What can I do to be used by God, not just on Sunday? And I know it's easy because, man, maybe you serve in the preschool. Well, God's using my gifts and my talents, and every Sunday I come and I love these preschoolers and I minister them and I'm showing them who Jesus is. I'm giving them a foundation, which is amazing, and you should, and that's awesome. Or I'm part of the kids ministry. You know those 1st through 6th graders? Yeah, they're a little rambunctious, sometimes a little out of control, but man, I love them. But what about Monday through Saturday? And I lead a small group. I have people in my home. I mean, we dive into God's word together. We unpack the sermon from Sunday's message, and we try to figure out what it means and how to apply it to our life. And again, these are all great things, and you should be a part of all of them. But what about Monday through Saturday? When I'm at work and I go back to the office, how can I worship Jesus and love others? When you go back to school, and you will go back to school at some time, maybe you've transitioned to homeschool and that's it for you, but my kids are going back to school at some point. I know, don't judge me, I'm sorry. But when you go back to school, kids, to worship Jesus and to love others, what will that look like? Will it be different than it was before? In your community, where if your community's been like mine, everybody's outside, everybody's walking, everybody's getting excited. I gotta get the kids out of the house. They're driving me crazy. Engaging your neighbors and being for them, worshiping Jesus and loving others. How is Monday through Saturday gonna be different? Again, I believe that no matter where you are, you have a next step. The question is, are you gonna take it? Are you going to be for whoever it is? Because God wants something for us, not from us. Will you pray with me?